Good afternoon and welcome back to Black Press USA and the Black Press of America Live. We have a very, very special guest this afternoon. Congresswoman Val Demings represents Florida's 10th Congressional District in the U.S. House of Representatives. Representative Demings is a lifelong public servant who broke numerous glass ceilings in her rise through the Orlando Police Department and her election to Congress. And for those who question why she would be on the short list of vice presidents or for the vice presidency, they haven't been paying attention. It is our privilege to welcome Representative Val Demings. And we also are joined by our distinguished president and CEO, the great Dr. Benjamin F. Chavis Jr.
Well, thank you very much, Stacey. And I just want to also officially welcome the Honorable Val Demings to the Black Press of America, the NMPA, the National Newspaper Publishers Association. We have several papers actually in Orlando. And Congresswoman Demings, we are so thankful, one, for your leadership, for your courage, for almost a sense of integrity that you represent. We saw you during the impeachment hearings. We saw you on the floor of the Congress and various things. And we're just so proud that you not only represent the 10th Congressional District in Florida, but you represent Black America. And we just want to salute you for your leadership. And I know we have you for a few minutes today. So I just want to get right, Stacey, to the first question.
Absolutely.
The George Floyd Justice in Policing Act is passed the House. What do you think? Does it have a chance to be passed by the Senate? You know, a lot of people around the country and every region is challenged by some of these issues that piece of legislation represents. But give us your take. I know you were one of the sponsors of the bill. What do you think it has a chance? And hopefully it'll get passed by the Senate.
Well, Dr. Chavis, first of all, let me say good afternoon to everyone and let you know how honored I am to be with you. I also want to thank you for the outstanding work that you have done and continue to do for our nation to make it a better place and help us live up to America's promise. Stacey, it's great to be with you as well. And I just thank you so much for this opportunity to tell the story. The George Floyd and Policing Act, let me just start here that I spent 27 years in law enforcement, had the honor of rising or working my way up through the ranks to become Orlando's first woman chief of police. It was a career that I loved, a job that I never took for granted. I went to work every day trying to keep people safe, strengthen our communities, and improve the quality of life for the people I was responsible for protecting. With that being said, what happened to George Floyd was brutal, it was senseless, and it was murder. And the persons responsible are being and should be held accountable. You know, with the Justice in Policing Act, we had the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. We had a hearing before the Judiciary Committee, and George Floyd's brother appeared during that hearing. And we talked about a lot of things. Of course, all the members who were there had an opportunity to question him and others. But one of the things that he said, I shall never, ever forget. And I really use it as a constant reminder of how critical and important the work is that we're involved in. He said this, he said, please don't let my brother's death be in vain. And just think about that. You know, he's appealing to the U.S. House of Representatives, one of the most powerful bodies in the world, to the Judiciary Committee, charged with upholding the Constitution, the rule of law, and protecting our form of government. And he's saying, please don't let my brother's death be in vain. And so, as you well know, we named the Justice in Policing Act on behalf of his brother, George Floyd. It received support from every Democratic member in the House. We even had, I believe it was 3 Republicans who supported the legislation. And in today's climate, that number may not seem significant, but in today's climate, it's pretty significant. As you know, unfortunately, the Senate presented or introduced their version, which was so watered down. It really does not have the teeth in it, if you will, that the Justice in Policing Act does, where we really have a good chance through legislation to hold law enforcement agencies, all 18,000 of them, accountable, and to just make things better, not only for the good men and women inside the agencies, but for those that they've sworn to protect. And so while the Senate has not moved, it's been well over 2 weeks now, we are certainly every day knocking on their door, reminding them that this is about life and death. This is about getting an institution that unfortunately has been used as a tool of oppression historically in our country. Doesn't mean everybody's bad there, but there are some. And we need to get this right. This legislation will help us do that. And we're reminding the Senate of that every day. And we're just hoping that enough senators under the current circumstances where there's total lack of accountability in the White House see that justice is administered and can move forward when good men and women who have the power to do that do their jobs. And so while we have not seen the movement that we hope to see, we're knocking on that door every day, and we hope that we will get the results that America needs to see.
Yeah, and Congresswoman, you talked about the teeth in the House Democrats' version of the law. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about that? Maybe give us one or two examples of the teeth and that the Republican side does not have, because I understand they made recommendations or they asked for studies.
Thank you. It's like, oh, please don't. Look, I spent a lot of years in law enforcement. I know the ins and outs. It's tough to pull the wool over my eyes about what we can do or cannot do. And imagine changing policing with the full weight of the federal government and the White House, by the way, before, supporting that effort. I just hope we don't have to wait until November to do that. But in the bottom line, Stacey, is the Senate version is like, we support a national database. Basically, I'm talking on behalf of the Senate, but just about everything else. Well, let me recommend this to you. Would you mind doing this? Come on, be nice about it. It just does not have any weight in it. The national database, we all agree with that. So law enforcement officers who have been charged with misconduct and perhaps fired from one agency or resigned pending termination cannot just go to another agency and get hired, as we've seen, unfortunately, with Tamir Rice's case. And so the national database us to better be able to track law enforcement officers who have engaged in misconduct. Now, let me say this as well, that agencies, though, all 18,000 of them, have a direct responsibility to make sure that they're doing proper backgrounds and all of that. So while the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act does support the national database, we also support things like developing national standards. So whether you are a 10-person law enforcement agency in a small town or a 36,000 person law enforcement agency in a big city, that there will be some national standards that really will help to govern who you hire. Will really better track diversity, because we say that law enforcement agencies certainly should reflect the community in which they serve. That will give some federal or some national standards and guidelines for training, whereas we look at the force continuum in the police department that starts with simple communication, your words, verbal words, up to and including the use of deadly force, where we have standards that really determine or really standardize, if you will, how police officers receive training, the training that they receive, with a major focus on de-escalation training. Wouldn't it be great if we gave officers the tools with their primary responsibility to keep people safe, whether that's the victim, the witness, or the suspect, or just some suspicious person, and limit the number of times that officers have to go hands-on or actually utilize one of the things that they carry around their waist. And the ability to talk. My dad used to call it the gift of gab, talking to people, helping to de-escalate and diffuse situations. So making sure that de-escalation training is not an option, but that is something that every police department, regardless of its size, has. And then another thing we need to do is look at the equipment that police officers utilize. One of the biggest problems, Stacey, is that the equipment is not in and of itself the equipment that they have, but the lack of training of when to use it. For example, in Orlando, we've certainly used our more militaristic equipment, to combat terrorism. We used it during the Pulse nightclub shooting, which allowed us to breach some locations, some walls and areas, and allow people to leave freely. But training officers so they'll know the appropriate use of the equipment is not for peaceful demonstrators. And so making sure that regardless of what equipment you already have, that you're properly trained in the equipment or you don't have it. And also, I'll say this lastly, is that looking at who trains police officers, I was absolutely shocked to find out that the officer in Minneapolis was a training officer. Because let us remember, we give the officers state statutes and rules and regulations and policies and procedures and send them out on their way. But it's the training officer who really teach young recruits what's acceptable and unacceptable on the street, which could possibly be a whole different culture or a whole different standard. So we need to make sure that the men and women training the next generation of chiefs and sheriffs and others in the police agency know what the rules are themselves and follow the rules.
Yeah,
so
the
Justice and Policing Act, I'm really excited about it. Now, look, it's just the beginning. Just like the First Step Act that we passed in the House and the president signed into law was a beginning, right? As we look at criminal justice reform, we look at things like the bail system, we look at prison reform, we need to look at sentencing, mandatory minimums, and all of that stuff. While it's a good step, it's a first step, and the Justice and Policing Act is the same. It's a beginning, but it does come up with some great, I think, criteria that can help police and help keep our communities safer.
Yeah, and before I yield back to our president, Dr. Chavis, and the minute we went on air, one of our viewers threw up this statement, I believe it was, more than it was a question. So let's just get that out of the way about the vice presidency. He says, listen to our future vice president. I'm just going to invite you, Congresswoman, to say anything you want about that before we move forward.
Well, Stacey, I'm glad that was like the first thing you threw up. I can breathe now. But anyway, let me just say this, and you all know my history. I grew up the daughter of a maid and a janitor in Florida, in Jacksonville, Florida. I'm the youngest of 7 children. I watched my father go to work every day, working odd jobs as well to keep a roof over our head and food on our table. The youngest of 7 children, but the first in my family to graduate college. As you all know, I worked as a social worker, law enforcement officer, and now a member of Congress. When I look back over my life, these are exactly the kind of opportunities that I go to work every day and work hard to try to create for young boys and young girls who may have been told they're the wrong color, they don't have enough money, nobody knows their parents, they're the wrong gender. And so to have my name called among a group of some pretty amazing women, public servants, is such an honor to me. It is a humbling experience. There's one person who will make that decision. If y'all want to make a call, go ahead. No, it's one person who will make that decision, and that's Vice President Biden. And but I'm honored to be considered. It's a very humbling experience.
Well, thank you very much. And our prayers that Vice President Biden will make the right decision. It certainly was the right decision to put you on the list. And from my perspective, you should be right at the top of that list.
Dr. Chavis, thank you so much for that.
You're quite welcome.
I think that generations are called to address certain issues during their generation. To serve this present age. I believe that's the old gospel hymn that I learned growing up in the Baptist church. And I do believe that certain people are called during certain times to address certain things, as you, Dr. Chavis, well know, because you've done just that. And so, like I said, I'm honored to be in the number. Very
good. Now, in Florida, in Texas, in Arizona, in California, in Oklahoma, in Arkansas, in Alabama, I could just go down. South Carolina, all the states now are experiencing, over some 30 states, there's an increase in COVID-19. And of course, back in March, I'm very pleased that the Black press, we declared a state of emergency for Black America because we saw what was happening to Black Americans and other people of color, disproportionately, not only getting disease, but disproportionately having fatal consequence. The death rate in our community is really still going up. because of COVID-19. We've established an NMPA coronavirus task force. But as one of the leaders of the Congressional Black Caucus, what do you see? I know that Jim Clyburn was put over the House Select Committee on COVID-19, and I know he has some oversight over all the stimulus funding. But from Florida, from one of the states now that's a hot spot as a member of Congress, what can you say to the audience, to Black Americans who are listening? Because at the beginning of the pandemic, I think there were a lot of myths and stereotypes going on. Some people say, well, if you got melanin, if you're a person of color, you can't get the disease. We know that's not true. I just wanted to make sure that we keep our people informed that this virus is still deadly, it's still contagious, it is still on the increase. And yet there are people in high places in Washington who seem to trivialize the impact. Over 130-some thousand Americans have passed as a result of COVID-19. Well, just give us your take on the COVID-19 pandemic from your perspective, Congresswoman.
Dr. Chavis, you have given me so much, and I hardly know where to begin with this, but one of the things I want to commend the National Black Press for is really not waiting to be told what to do and not being reactive, but understanding, this is something Jim Clyburn likes to repeat a lot, is that when America catches a cold, Black people get pneumonia or get the flu. And so not waiting for somebody else to exercise the leadership for you as you keep Black Americans informed, but really taking the initiative to be proactive and giving some guidelines. We know that of the almost 3 million people who have contracted, or it's over 3 million, over 3 million people who have contracted COVID-19 in the United States, the overwhelming majority are Black and brown people. We can look at the death rate, as you've indicated, 135,000, the majority are Black and brown people. If I look here in Florida at our numbers, which are not good, we're at about 300,000 people who have contracted the virus and over 4,000, about 4,500 deaths. Overwhelming majority are Black and brown people. And I thank God for the people, organizations who took the initiative to give some pretty clear direction, but also for our local and state leadership, mayors and others who took the initiative in the absence of leadership, in the absence of clear direction, to give guidance, to listen to the scientists and medical experts and researchers, to talk about the CDC guidelines and how something as simple as wearing masks and practicing social distancing can help protect you and your loved ones and others. And as we also know, unfortunately, a lot of Black and brown people work jobs where they cannot shelter in place and they cannot stay at home. And so we have to work with those businesses and corporations and others to make sure that they are taking steps to keep their employees, our families, and our communities safe as well. We're in this mess that we're in, and let me just say this, I'm not going to dress it up. That's not how I have lived my life. We're in trouble. And there is a complete absence of leadership in the White House. And unfortunately, there are too many governors, like we have here in the state of Florida, who have made a decision to follow the president who isn't going anywhere. So when you follow someone who's not leading, you end up with some of the highest numbers, as we've seen, Dr. Chavis, in the states that you've named, of the virus. And so, as you know, here in Florida, we're planning, not us, let me take that back. They are planning a Republican convention. I mean, really, in my hometown of Jacksonville, that just makes no sense when our primary responsibility as leaders, regardless of what level, is the health, safety, and well-being of the people that we represent. And so the president has made the decision, as you well know. Dr. Fauci has said we're knee-deep in the first wave. We've been talking about future waves. We're knee-deep in the first wave. And the president is saying, no, let's just go about business as usual because he needs to be reelected. And so again,
they're attacking Dr. Fauci now. They're trying to undermine him.
don't you know it's coming? Being loyal means nothing to this president, because sooner or later, if you have any decency inside you at all, like I know Dr. Fauci does, sooner or later the president, who doesn't appear to have any, is going to turn against you. And that's what we're seeing with Dr. Fauci. But I thank God for Dr. Fauci. And one of the things that Joe Biden said, for example, is that one of his first orders of business would be to call up Dr. Fauci and say, look, I know you've served a lot of presidents. I need you to serve one more. And so we know better. We have to continue to listen to the medical experts, listen to the scientists, listen to the researchers. We know better than anybody how to protect our loved ones and our families and those our coworkers and others that we care about. And we need to continue to do that until we get leadership in our states and in the nation who really put people above politics.
And along those lines, in Orange County, California, you probably saw that the school board there not only said that they're going to open up, but they have prohibited face masks and they have prohibited social distancing. We need you to respond to that for all of America.
Stacey, I just don't get it. I'll pivot back to our number one responsibility above everything else is the health, safety, and well-being of the people that we represent. And so while we get it, we know, I hear it, all the time as a member of Congress. I know my husband, he's the mayor in Orange County, and other leaders hear it that, the economy's suffering, the economy's hurting. We get that. We know that we need to open back up as quickly as we can, but we never compromise safety. The health, safety, and well-being of the people we represent. It has to be first. We do not have to make a choice between, either our health and safety or the economy. We will not be able to fully get on the right track with the economy until we get the virus under control. And our children, remember that most precious resource when we think about the future. They're the ones that we're trying to set the example for now, where they're the ones that we need to lead the way. Taking care of our children, of course, is a primary concern. And we get it. Distance learning is challenging. Everybody cannot, do homeschooling or whatever. We would love to see the kids get back in the classroom. Parents need to go back to work, but we will never compromise the health, safety, and well-being of our children or our families for anything. It's our number one concern.
Yeah.
Thank you. I believe that Congresswoman Demings, the Congressional Black Caucus, we have the largest number of African Americans in the Congress than ever before. And your chairwoman, Karen Bass, Congresswoman Karen Bass from California, we've been working very close, the NMPA, with the CBC. Mm-hmm. And we're just so proud that you and your colleagues in the Congress, on all these key committees in the Congress of the United States, taking care of the business of your constituents, while things seem to be adrift in other parts of the government. What is your perspective as we move toward the November elections? I'm very concerned that the census may be undercounted, very concerned that because of voter suppression is still going on, and now even amidst the pandemic, you saw what Kentucky did, they just start shutting down the voting polls to keep people from voting. What's your concern about the integrity of the election that's coming up in November?
Well, let me just comment, if I will, on the Congressional Black Caucus. I am so proud to be a member of the Congressional Black Caucus. Before I was elected in 2016, I admired those men and women from afar. But to have the opportunity to serve with them, and currently under the leadership of an outstanding chairwoman, Karen Bass, is just such an honor. We say the CBC is the conscience of Congress. And that is so true. When we think about social justice, when we think about Black folks having access to health care, to quality education, to housing, to other things that signify the American dream, the Congressional Black Caucus never forgets. Others may have other priorities, and that's fine. But we're about taking care or making sure that the most vulnerable in our society are never forgotten and never left behind. And so, we have a weekly meeting, and I got to tell you, it is the highlight with having serving on Judiciary and the Intelligence Committee and Homeland Security. The work that we do with the Congressional Black Caucus is really the highlight of my time within Congress. You better know that we are clearly worried about voter suppression. When will it stop? When we talk about systemic racism in our society, and why are we here today with all of the good work that has gone on, where we're here today because some people just never stop. And you're absolutely correct. We've seen what they did in Kentucky. We saw what happened in Wisconsin. We saw what happened in Georgia. And so if we act like we don't know, we know, or we should know, that there's always this concerted effort to suppress the vote. And we have to be ever vigilant and make sure that we keep our eyes on the ball. We know, and as you mentioned earlier, we mentioned when we were having our discussion before we went on the air, that we know this president, I served as an impeachment manager, and we know this president will do anything. And desperate people do desperate things. He's clearly desperate. And so we take nothing for granted. It's nothing to him to orchestrate closing down polling places so people will have to stand in line for 7 hours or have to drive an hour just to vote. We have an initiative, I call it on steroids, if you will, initiative to vote by mail in Florida, as well as other states throughout the country. And for a lot of reasons, but number one, as Dr. Fauci said, we're still knee deep in the first surge of COVID-19. We don't know where we will be with the virus come November. And there again, we have to be proactive and take nothing for granted. We still are trying to make voting for people who live in the greatest country in the world easier and not more difficult, and voting by mail is one of the ways of doing that. In Florida, we have an unconditional vote by mail system. If you want to vote by mail, just fill out an application requesting your ballot. We are encouraging every man and woman who's registered to vote to go ahead and fill out that application. Regardless of, you might want to be at the polls on election day, you might be able to go to the polls on election day, but go ahead and request your vote by mail ballot so you'll have it in hand. And regardless of what the conditions are on the ground, whether it's COVID-19 or voter suppression, because they've closed down 100 out of 105 polling places, you'll have your ballot and it'll be able to cast it. I think it's very interesting that the president is fighting so hard against vote by mail after he completed his ballot and took it to the mailbox and voted by mail. And several people on his staff did. But look, if we say we're unfamiliar with voter suppression in this country, shame on us, because we're very familiar with it. And we just have to do everything that we can to be ahead of it. I want to just close this question, Doctor, with this comment too. Here in Florida, we passed Amendment 4, which would give convicted felons who pay their debt to society the right to cast their vote. And I think it's disgraceful how the governor and others have fought against that, trying to basically institute what would be equivalent to a poll tax, saying that if they owe back court fees or whatever, that they've got to clear up all of the back fees before they can go vote. Well, that's kind of hard to do if you've been incarcerated for a while. And plus, we have people who vote in every election who are behind on their child support or have back fees to the court. So why would you try to create a different standard for a different group of people? So we're continuing to fight to make sure that people who have paid their debt to society are given full privilege to cast the most basic right that they have, and that's the right to vote. So we're trying to stay a step ahead. In the CARES Act that we passed, we also included funding for the United States Postal Service to make sure that they have the infrastructure in place. Now, we didn't get the amount of money approved that we asked. We did get some, but We're trying to make sure that the Postal Service has the infrastructure in place to be able to accommodate the additional workload that we are definitely trying to create through our vote by mail initiative. So more to follow on that, but we're trying to stay 10 steps ahead.
Well,
Yeah, real quick, and I'll let you close.
Quick question.
Yeah, real quick, and I'll let you close, Dr. Chavis. I know we have to let the Congresswoman go. Two quick things. One, Secretary Clinton said yesterday that she's afraid that if he's defeated in November, Trump will not, or try to be prevented from leaving office. He'll try to prevent his removal from office. And secondly, real quick, there was an op-ed, I think it posted today in The Hill, that spelled out that he's positioning himself to pardon himself. So two quick things, and Dr. Chavis, you can close, but Congresswoman, any response to those two issues?
I thought you were supposed to ask the tough questions up front, but gosh, you just made me sick to my stomach to even suggest him pardon himself. But who would try to do that other than a Donald Trump? And let's start with Secretary Clinton, and he wouldn't want to leave the White House. Let me just say this. Number one, I think he hates the job. I think it's just, you're supposed to be too accountable. It's not a job where you should be allowed to break the law and ignore the Constitution, not the rule of law. You can lie your way through. I think he really hates the job, but losing, I think he also hates to lose. And I can see this president refusing to leave the White House. We have a way of taking care of that if we have to cross that bridge. I just want to be on the team, okay, that takes care of that. Number two, for him to pardon himself, the gall and the nerve to really pardon your friends, your enablers, those who lied, cheated, and did other things to cover up for your wrongdoing. And so with that, we see what he did recently with Roger Stone, someone who was convicted of multiple federal crimes, multiple felonies. And as Special Counsel Mueller said, he remains a convicted felon, as he should. But I would see this president trying to do something like that. I would just hope that the United States Supreme Court, I've been very pleased recently with some of the decisions coming out of the U.S. Supreme Court, would never allow that to happen. I certainly hope that while the president does not respect or recognize Congress and the courts of equal branches of government, shame on us if we would allow that to happen. Yeah. But let me say, I'll end on this, but he is worried because he knows the day he leaves the White House, and I'll just leave it at that.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And this is not a question, just a request. As you continue, please let the DCCC, the DNC, and all of the decision makers know that the Black press, we are here ready to help get out this vote, GOTV. We think we should have the largest voter turnout. In spite of the voter suppression, we want to work with all of the entities that are working on getting out the vote. And sometimes, Congresswoman Demings, you'd be surprised. Sometimes the Black press, they're thought of in the final days of the campaign rather than in the early days. And we think that to overcome voter suppression, we need to be stressing GOTV now, even before the convention, certainly after the convention leading up into November. So it's just a request that please encourage your colleagues who make these decisions to put the Black press in a first place of consideration when it comes to all the political ads, all the advertising, and all the mobilization for GOTV. We are ready, we're fired up and ready to go.
President Chavis, thank you so much for that. And we met a few months ago with members of the Black press, and we carried that message. But thank you so much as we are approaching fastly Election Day, putting that back at the front of my mind. I will make a couple of phone calls today to the D-Trip and to Tom Perez directly to make sure that he remembers that. No, don't let this be a second thought, right? We cannot say in the same breath that Democrats cannot win without the African American community, but have the African American press, the main voice, the voice of the people in our communities, be an afterthought. So thank you so much for putting that back at the forefront of my mind. And I will make sure that I deliver that message, and will also encourage other members, Black and white and Hispanic, to help deliver that message as well. So thank you so much.
And thank you so much again for your leadership, and we will stay in tune, and you call on us. We're ready to serve.
I will, and invite me back. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. The great Congresswoman Val Demings. We thank you so much. This is Black Press USA and the Black Press of America. Everyone stay well and stay safe. Thanks for joining us.
God bless.
Thank you. God bless you as well.